We're on to the book of 2 Samuel today, and this is chapters 1 to 4. This continues exactly after the end of the previous book, so it's not clear why there are two books, but perhaps that shall become clear later on. We open anyway with an Amalekite coming to David. Amalekite, who recall from the previous video before the summary, the people that David wiped out entirely, completely, they were all dead. The same people who, 14 chapters earlier, was it? Saul and Samuel killed all of until they were all dead as well. So Amalekites are kind of like the Japanese knotweed of weird tribes, I guess. That's some sort of odd thing. Anyway, this guy comes to David with an interesting story to tell him that Saul has died. But this conflicts with the account in the previous video of how Saul did die, because it said in that Saul was mortally wounded, asked someone to finish him off, and they couldn't do it. His armour bearer couldn't bear to do it, so he did it himself. This Amalekite, however, who says he's escaped from the Israelite camp, comes to David and says that Saul asked him to kill him, and that he then did it. So it's a bit odd. David, however, says thank you very much to the Amalekite for bringing him that news, and then kills him for having killed God's anointed king, i.e. Saul. He then tears his clothes and goes fasting and mourning and all sorts of things for Saul. Saul being the guy who kept throwing spears at him and everything. Very odd. We then have a fairly boring poem, which I think is written by David, just talking about how sad it is that Saul and Jonathan are dead. Saul again being the guy who kept throwing spears at him. And interesting, because we had Jonathan saying that Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. A bit weird, but we had that a few times. It's now saying that David felt that Jonathan's love for him was more wonderful than that of any woman. Perhaps the world's first bromance, I think, maybe. As expected, we then have David being made king, but it says that he's only made king over the tribe of Judah, i.e. over 1/12 of Israel. So we then have this chap called Abner, who it says is the commander of Saul's army, who decides that Saul's son, Ishbosheth, which is quite hard to say because it sounds like you've been drinking when you're saying it, but Ishbosheth becomes Abner's favourite person to be king, so he makes him king, and he then resides over the other 11 tribes of Israel. The Bible then notes that there's a civil war, which I guess inevitably, and this goes on for some time, but then it also notes that Ishbosheth is only king for 2 years, and David only king for 7. Not sure if that's just king over Judah or king entirely for 7 years. And it also, there's one scuffle they talk about where David's men kill 360 Benjaminites. And don't get me wrong, 360 people killed, that's not a good day, obviously. But we're talking in the context of a civil war, and we're talking numbers of like that. So not quite sure to what extent there was this civil war. It seems anyway that over time David's side seemed to win out, despite there being 11 times more people on Ishbosheth's side, and the balance of power starts tipping towards David. We then have Abner coming to David and saying he's prepared to defect over to him and reckons he can bring Israel over with him. David says, great, that's brilliant, yep, thanks very much, but when you come, could you bring my sort of wife with you? This being Saul's daughter, who David produced 200 foreskins for in order to marry, and then it turns out it doesn't seem that marriage did happen. This daughter of Saul's is actually married to someone else, but it sounds like Abner does then bring her along with him when he goes over to David's side. We then have all sorts of kerfuffles. Abner's killed, and then Ishbosheth's own men decide to kill him, and they lop off his head and they take it to David and go, here you go, look what we've got for you as this nice present. And David kills them, similar to the Amalekite situation, seemingly annoyed that they've killed what he considers to be an innocent man, which is interesting given that's his opponent in the civil war. Interesting. So in the short version of that story, we have basically that Israel is divided between Ishbosheth and David. We then have a bit of a civil war that ensues, and then we have basically David winning. A couple of interesting points in that worth pulling out. One being this idea that David has just stolen someone's wife, I think. That may turn out to be wrong, but it does seem like that's what's happening at the minute. And that is very explicitly forbidden in the Bible. So yeah, it's a bit odd that David's doing that, and maybe something's going to be mentioned later in terms of that's not okay and there's going to be some comeuppance. But for now, David is doing something that's not okay. We also then, of course, have the problem, well, not problem, but at the beginning we have the Amalekite who comes to David and claims to have killed Saul. Interestingly, we established in the previous book that this wasn't true, so because Saul actually ended his own life. So this guy's claiming something that didn't happen, presuming on the assumption that David is going to like it, and then obviously gets killed for it. And then we have Ishbosheth's men who lop off his head and bring it to David, presumably also with the, hey, look what we did for you, aren't we great? And he kills them as well. So it's an interesting thing it says about David, doesn't it? It's the question of, is he like some sort of movie bad guy? You know, like in the movies where the bad guy gets the goodie hostage and then points a gun at them and says, tell me where this, that or the other is and I'll let you live. They then tell him and then the baddie kills them anyway. So is David a bit like that? He's sort of Al Capone sort of gangster king? Or is it that he's so righteous that he's willing to risk having a reputation where if you come and bring him something that actually he likes but you've done it in a bad way, he's going to kill you for it, which is not to his benefit certainly. But then I can't believe he's that righteous because he's nicking someone's wife and, well, he's killing a lot of people as well, isn't he? So, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one. But we'll soldier on anyway and see how this pans out, because clearly this is all continuation of the same story. And, yeah, we'll see what's next.